So welcome everyone. So today we're going to be discussing frontside 50-50s, and you can just see a few examples here of the movement. And we're going to break down the trick, as we typically do, into four main sections. So we're going to think about the approach, the takeoff, the trick itself, and then the landing. Now in terms of what the trick actually is, you can see here we've got riders jumping on from the side of the feature, but the feature itself is actually facing their chest, so front side typically. So what we're going to do is discuss two main options in which you can kind of get onto the feature. So we're going to discuss a pop version and an ollie version. So for those unfamiliar with the two terms, the pop is going to be an even weight, slight pressure on the toe edge, kind of jumping both feet up at the same time to get onto the feature. And then an ollie is using a little bit more of the natural spring of the board through the tail, which will kind of give you a little bit of kind of like lift, and as we call ollie, onto the feature. So a little bit more progressive, a little bit more technical, and a bit more advanced. So when I'm coaching this for the first time, for a lot of people, what I'm going to be doing is actually working through a pop version first. And I find that works really well in terms of building confidence, so that you're not kind of throwing yourself in at the deep end straight onto a feature. So let's just break down the pop version first, and let's talk about the approach. So typically what we're trying to do, irrespective of whether it's ollie or pop, is we're taking a relatively shallow angle into the feature. You can kind of see here I'm kind of aiming to the end of the feature I'm trying to target. And so we're not trying to kind of come in too steep. That's most of the issues I find with people when they first jump onto side hit rails, is they come really steep across and they almost jump into a front side board slide, which is way too much rotation to get onto the feature. So in terms of the approach, you'll see a little bit there, look, a bit more relaxed, not trying to come in too steep. So if we look in more detail here, can you see the board is kind of pointing and aiming towards the end of the feature you want to get onto, and then kind of leading a little bit with the shoulders. And when we're looking to discuss the pop, basically you've kind of shoulders are leading, and then the board will kind of lift and then come and join the shoulders as we land, like that. So we can see here slightly steeper approach coming in across, but what we've got is we're able to make a little bit more of an adjustment in the air to then still land how we want to. And that's what you've kind of got to watch. You want to start a little bit shallow to begin with, not too steep, otherwise you'll end up having to make way more corrections in the air, as well as kind of struggle to get your body back balanced when you're on the feature. So that's the approach. Keep it simple, aiming towards the end, making those adjustments. So if we're talking about takeoff, so with the pop, both feet extend up. And what you'll often find with the pop as well is there might be a little bit of cycling that goes on. It kind of sounds quite strange, but if you look at what's happening with me here, my shoulders go and the board kind of comes a little bit behind me and then in front. So you'll find a little bit with the pop version, you'll kind of get that little bit of cycling, so it won't be as kind of progressive and floaty on as the ollie. So you get a little bit of the board behind, and then it's going to then kind of hit the feature. So you just got to watch that little movement. Sometimes for beginners, they struggle. The kind of board almost goes into an involuntary method as well, so they kind of really whip the board up behind them and then try and bring it forward. So you just got to be aware of that in relation to the pop. It shouldn't cause too many issues as long as you choose the right kind of feature. Nothing massively high that you've got to jump onto, because you're not going to get as much lift as you would from an ollie. So let's just go through a few of these pops again. There we go. So it's pretty straightforward. You can see I can use the pop to jump between features there, just to get a bit more creative. Different kind of angles. Now if we're talking about the trick itself, I think most of you will have probably tried a 50-50 before. Literally as soon as you land, what we're trying to do is think about stability and trying to be nicely stacked over the board. So you can see shoulders. I always kind of say shoulders in line with the toes, So as you kind of compress a little bit and kind of sink onto the feature, you'll feel you're lowering your centre of mass and you'll feel way more stable and way more relaxed. So landing is literally just kind of like chill on the feature, keep your shoulders aligned with the feature as well. So sometimes once people land on the feature, they kind of come into a little bit of a kind of panic mode or a bit surprised, and they start to open their shoulders when they're on it, and that's going to make the board rotate because the board wants to follow the angles of your shoulders. So resist the urge to open up when you're on the feature, maintain that nice posture, nice and stacked, eyeballing where do you want to go, because once again eyes kind of lead the shoulders and then that starts to kind of spiral down to the board. So we want to make sure we can kind of keep an eye on where we want to go. And then just like here, if you want, you can do a little bit of a pop off. So we're talking about the final stage, the landing. Pretty self-explanatory really. You're just trying to make sure the board's nice and flat. Slight pressure on the toes for stability and absorption if you want, but you're literally just riding straight off the feature rather than kind of plopping off it or dropping off it and then getting too nose heavy. Just want to let it kind of cruise in. So let's just go back through this pop version again, just so you can kind of get a bit more of an idea on what's happening. So on, see, notice a few of the visual cues, alignment, bring the board up behind and back over, eyeballing the end of the feature, nice and balanced on the landing for maximum stability. Now if we're starting to talk about ollies, there's not going to be masses of changes, so we know the trick itself and the landing and stuff like that is going to be good. The approach is the same as well, so all we're changing is just that takeoff point. And literally what you're trying to do is just bring in a little bit more of a progressive ollie, which is going to be slightly off the toes, not massively, just slightly, and that's going to help pressure the tail of the board and kind of make it ping, give you a little bit more of a progressive landing as well onto the feature itself, because you'll find you can kind of place the board a little bit more delicately when you do an ollie, whereas a pop is a little bit kind of more heavy footed, so both feet are landing boom same time, you kind of get that little bit of a jolt, whereas with the ollie you can really kind of delicately place your board on top of the feature. So let's just watch a few of these. You can see slight variation. You're still trying to get that absorption on the landing, on the feature, and then the landing off. There we go. So not too bad, is it? So let's go back through. Once again, same cues. Shallow approach, aiming towards the end of the feature, a little bit of an ollie, shoulders are kind of leading the way. Then you get that little bit of rotation underneath you, so the board then comes back aligned with the feature. You get nice and stacked when you're on the feature, so you're not going to kind of peel off too early. So just watch those again. So let's talk about a few drills. So if you think you're starting out with this kind of movement and you haven't done much other stuff before, you might have done a ride on box 50-50, which is great. So let's think about a few drills that are going to initially get this pop motion working. Now, if we're talking about pop, you can see here we're kind of stacked. We've got kind of house shape with the legs, little bit of flex and a little bit of push off the toes to get that spring, which is a great start. Now we've got here, we know that we're going to need to jump from one side of the feature to get on top of the feature, so therefore that we've got to start moving with this pop as well. So this is a little jump up, pop up slope drill, so that can really help you just get that stacking. And then if you want, step it up again, give yourself a target, something to get over, because initially when you do it, you're probably going to be intimidated by the feature to some extent. So you really want to make sure you've got more of a capacity in the tank to be able to get on top of it. That's why we kind of try and choose low features to start with, so you can build your confidence and less effort to get on top. But you can see here, just a ski pole, a few little cups, something to jump on. I've got some cones here. working on accuracy as well, because quite often you can kind of get a bit foggy in your mind in terms of, right, can I get both feet onto the feature at the same time? Am I just placing one, etc.? So just having something like a cones or some kind of marker in the snow really helps just make sure that your body is working together with your board. You can see here getting a bit more accurate. We've got a single cone to go onto as well, and balance. And then what you can do here, if you don't want to jump straight to a feature, you can put some kind of markers in the snow. So that can be some poles here, you can just draw a line in the snow, something like that, where you can work through the movement patterns before you fully commit to throwing yourself onto a feature. Now you can see here just an upturned board, similar kind of deal. Just anything you feel you might need, just to test your skills. You know, if you feel happy just throwing yourself onto something, then that's brilliant. You know, just pick the appropriate kind of feature so that you're not pushing it too hard too early, because it is a relatively simple movement, but you know, you can make some pretty obvious mistakes which will smoke you on the feature. So you can just see these drills again. There we go. So you can just test your skills. Now here with the ollie on, I'm using a ski pole and a couple of cones here. You can do anything you need to do on the piste. It's similar to the pop drills. You can go across the slope and ollie, you know, slightly off the toe edge and try and jump up the slope. Things like that, just different kind of ideas. You can draw another little box in the snow and then jump and ollie into that box from the side. You can put that down the slope. All those kind of things. If you need to test your skills, then you can. Do you know what I mean? So it's all sorts of little ways in which you can kind of build up. And when we're talking about building up, we finish here. Think about the feature selection. So here, you know, we've literally got the tiniest little tube laying in the snow, so we can test our accuracy of placement, and then you can just ease into it. Don't feel obliged to hit the, you know, the biggest features in the park straight off. So you can see a little bit of a thinner rail, but not too high, so you can work on the accuracy and the core movements. Low feature, keeping it simple, then you can go a bit longer. See if you can get to the end. Same kind of deal, nice and low. Then you can go to something a little bit taller, a little bit longer again. So you can just build up slowly, make sure that you've got the fundamentals correct before you start throwing yourself in at the deep end, and then you've got a rails like this where you know it's the ultimate challenge to get through. So let's just recap a little bit. So let's talk about the fundamentals. So you've got two main options, haven't you? You've got a pop takeoff and you've got an ollie takeoff. Pop is going to be a great start to build your confidence and the key foundations of the skill set. And then if you can, then try to progress to an ollie on. That's going to be your long-term goal, and that will give you way more progressive and more, you'll be able to get onto larger features, be more accurate with your board and body placement if you start to work through the ollie. So let's break down the approach stuff. Simple approach, aiming shallow kind of towards the end of the feature you want to get to. As you kind of get to the lip of the jump, if you want to do a pop, then you're just going to do a nice even weight extension, slight pressure on the toe edge, and that will then bring you through and land onto the feature. You're trying to match the board to your shoulders going through. When you're on the feature, you want to center your mass, drop it a little bit lower, flex a tiny bit down, and then make sure you don't open your shoulders when you're on the feature. And then the trick itself, literally taking it really, really relaxed. You're not trying to add any extra inputs in, are you? So you're not trying to twist your body or anything like that. You're just literally trying to keep your eyes on the end of the feature, keep your body and your board and everything with your hips and your shoulders aligned with the feature. And then for the landing, you're just taking it super relaxed. You're just carrying on that momentum off the end of the feature, kind of looking where you want to land. Keeping, you know, you might land a little bit toe side pressure just so you can absorb anything, especially if you're on a bigger feature. But other than that, should be pretty self-explanatory. So if there's any other questions that you guys have on this trick, feel free to message me. But other than that, you know, watch through the video a couple of times, think about the visual cues, build up slowly in terms of the skills, maybe do some piste work first so you make sure you've got your pops and your ollies and your accuracy on point, and then choose those nice chilled features so you can build up your confidence and your skills and then take it beyond that to something more technical.